When people talk about pie in the sky stuff, there's an urbanist Twitter guy, huge following, very popular, and basically is saying, like sometimes literally saying this, let's do this tomorrow. Which is cool. With whose money? With what money? High-speed rail from Chicago to Atlanta via Nashville. Awesome. That sounds great. But realistically, that's like a 15 or 20 year project if you start today. If California high-speed rail is going to cost 100 billion, 150 billion, I don't know. You're talking triple the distance. So, maybe if we got costs under control a little bit, maybe it would only cost 300 billion. Like, I think that kind of thing is really irresponsible because you're overpromising and underdelivering. That sort of thing is never going to happen. You're not going to have a 220 mile an hour train from Chicago to Atlanta in the next 20 years, in the next 25 years. It's insanely unrealistic for a lot of reasons. Now, there should be a train. Does it need to be state-of-the-art high-speed rail? No. And that's not even really what Europe has been doing. If you actually look at it, it's incremental improvements to the existing rail network for the most part. I mean, some of the lines are brand new, but not often in their entirety. And when they are, they're much shorter distances than what we're talking about. I think about this in terms of California high-speed rail all the time. Like, I don't know why they had to promise 2 hours and 40 minutes from LA to San Francisco. Why? 3 hours and 10 minutes slower, sure, but not unreasonable, and I think for most people far preferable to flying. It's not going to take you, the trip's not going to take you longer to get from downtown to downtown when you think about it. Like, if you're in downtown LA, you have to get out to the west side to LAX. I mean, if you're smart, you're leaving 2 or 3 hours early for that. And then you're on the plane for an hour. You get to SFO, and you've got at least another 45 minutes to get to downtown San Francisco. What would have been wrong with 3 hours and 10 minutes? But I can tell you what would have been right with it. It would have been far cheaper to build and far more practical. You could have tighter curves. You could have steeper grades. It would have permitted you to go around obstacles instead of going through them. They would have had a much easier time with right-of-way acquisition. 185 miles an hour versus 220. What are you gaining versus what you're losing in terms of the opposition that you're generating, in terms of the extra costs that you're generating? In theory, it would be great if I could get on a train and be in Tampa in 30 minutes. But in reality, it only needs to be faster than driving because I'm not going to fly from Orlando to Tampa. It's only 90 miles. I don't need to get there in the blink of an eye. It only needs to be faster than the alternatives. Yes, incrementally, faster trains, awesome. When you're selling state-of-the-art, top speed, high speed at hundreds of billions of dollars for routes, it just means less rail for everyone and the public growing very frustrated with projects that are way behind schedule and way over budget. Yes, 100% irresponsible. The urbanist YouTubers, and then you see the echoes of it on Reddit and on Twitter. Occasionally, but not that often, I will hear it at work-related functions. And even non-urbanists, like my aunt, will drop a casual, oh, they have great cities in Europe, you could just walk everywhere. I know she's never been to the suburbs of Paris or London because no one goes to visit them on vacation. They go to central London, they go to the city of Paris, and everyone's grinding it out at work. All the other tourists are there to take in all of the grinding. It's busy, it's vibrant. All of these people are there who don't live there, and you can't necessarily tell who's who. Everybody, all these tourists are marveling at this vibrant city, and then they go to Manhattan and they do the same thing. San Francisco, Chicago. 1.6 million people live in Manhattan. The weekday, daytime population of the city is over 4 million. At least it was before COVID. All of that shopping and all of those restaurants and all of that vibrancy, it doesn't exist solely because of Manhattan's residential density. It's mostly because of the employment density. And if you took away 2 million workers, then what you're left with is a denser version of the Bronx. This is not an original observation on my part. In 1938, Lewis Mumford was writing about this in his book Culture of Cities, talking about subways and rail networks. He said,
mechanical collectives, the mega machines as I call them, were brutal. They used punishment as a way of enforcing conformity.
I don't know if I can really do it justice, but I'll try. Though such transportation systems open up new areas on the outskirts of the city, they but thicken the crowding at the center. Except for the Inner Circle Railway in London, metropolitan subway lines have been almost uniformly built so as to throw an increasing load of passengers into the central district. In the middle of the 1920s, as many as 2 million people came into Manhattan from the outlying boroughs and territories in a single day, and a good part of this traffic took place within the span of an hour and a half, morning and night. That's from page 238 of Mumford's Culture of Cities. This is a map of the New York City subway, and you can see how all roads lead to Manhattan. But this is the regional rail system of Greater New York City. The network stretches 150 miles from east to west and 115 miles from north to south. We've spent the better part of 2 centuries building this massive rail network in Greater New York that has turned Manhattan, or alternatively Paris or Amsterdam or Chicago, into an urbanist fantasy land by concentrating more and more workers in a small area. When those 2 million workers go home at the end of the day, they're not going back to a different version of Manhattan. They're going home to Ozone Park.
Standing on the corner of Cross Bay Boulevard and 133rd Street in Ozone Park, and this might be one of the busiest corners that I've stood on in a long time, and the noise is overwhelming. But in Jack Kerouac's time living here, 1943 to 1949, it would have been completely different. It would have been relatively silent. There was a farm up the road. This was a tree-lined boulevard. There were hardly any cars.
Or Wyandanch, or Inwood, or White Plains, or Weehawken, or South Orange. I know South Orange. It's a great town. But it's not Manhattan. None of those places are. It's not possible for all of New York City to be Manhattan. And it's not possible for all of Paris to be Paris. Because a lot of Paris could be SoCal. It could be the Bay Area or Northern Virginia. There's just less grass, slightly different architecture, and more park it where it's hot. Plenty of people in Paris might work in the 11e, but at the end of the day, most of those people GTFO for the suburbs. 85% of Metro Paris lives in the suburbs, and 67% of them work there. Alright, I don't remember where I was, but what Mumford is saying is that we've created these sort of impossible feedback loops in cities where you have this concentration of population and retail activity, just commercial activity in general, and that attracts more people. And then eventually there's a demand for better transportation infrastructure because there's too much crowding at the center. But that new transportation infrastructure just brings more people in, creates more commercial activity, brings in more people, which then creates more demand for more transportation infrastructure. At the foundation of it is that all infrastructure adds value to land. Roads add value. Sewer and water connections add more value. Rapid transit service, as in the Paris Metro or New York City subway, adds a lot more value. It's that access that's provided by those systems that's attractive to the corporate offices and the retailers who want to both be able to draw from a large talent pool, but then also to get a lot of eyeballs on their storefronts or their office buildings or whatever. Merchants are always going to gravitate towards the high traffic areas, and those high traffic areas are just naturally going to be towards the center. It's just naturally where you're going to have the most foot traffic. And so what I'm saying is that people can't go work downtown in this vibrant, bustling downtown, and then when they're done for the day, also go home to a vibrant, bustling suburb. It just can't work like that. It's necessarily going to be quiet and boring. It's always been like this. I mean, like, you can go back to the Paris in the medieval era. You can go back to ancient Rome. Urbanists need to figure out then what it is that they're asking for. Because if you want a bustling downtown where everyone can walk to everything, then you are not going to find that outside of that core. And if you want a decentralized city where there are a bunch of different activity centers that winds up looking an awful lot like Los Angeles. And maybe you could make the comparison to Parramatta in Sydney.
Once upon a time, the tallest commercial building in Parramatta was the Westfield, standing at about 4 stories tall. But the skyline in the west is rising rapidly. Today, 7 News toured a brand new skyscraper, which claims to be the greenest in Greater Sydney.
You can also, Toronto's got a bunch of edge cities as well, or around DC, even in Sydney, New York. It should be clear that you can have as many downtowns as you want. It's not going to stop the existence of suburbs. As long as you have centralized locations where a lot of people have easy access, the concentration of employment follows and the concentration of goods and services follows. It's a feedback loop. You can have 1, you can have 5, you can have 25, but that's what's going to happen. And once you get, even if you have 25 quote unquote centers, once you get outside of those centers, it's going to be quiet and boring. You go to Brooklyn, right? No one is getting all of their needs met in Flatbush or Midwood. If you want to go to see a film, your doctor may be in the neighborhood, but probably not. If you need to go to like an orthopedic center, you're probably not gonna find that there. Probably not gonna work there. To think that that's ever gonna happen or could be made to happen if only we just could get a little more authoritarian about where people live and how they can travel is really to fundamentally misunderstand cities, to misunderstand travel demand, human desire, urban history, and primarily central place theory.
It is not cheap, but most importantly, the rents here in Parramatta are about a third of the Sydney CBD.
So sure, you can build 2 new Parramattas, but that's just a relief valve for the CBD. It's not a challenge to the primacy of the CBD.
You've had 300,000 people travel through Parramatta each morning on their way to the CBD behind me. That's coming to an end.
So Minister Tony here seems to think that 300,000 people who pass the Parramatta CBD every day on their way to work are going to magically stop doing that and start working in this new Parramatta CBD. That's not how it works. I'm sorry to say. 300,000 people don't magically stop in Newark because now they don't have to commute to New York City anymore. All the people in the East Bay who pass through Oakland on their way to work in San Francisco. No, if the Parramatta CBD has 5% of all of the jobs in the Sydney metropolitan area, then those 5% of people might be a little bit closer to Parramatta, but generally they're going to be coming from all over the metro area. People are going to have ridiculous commutes just like they did before. People have homes, they have kids who are in school, they have partners who have jobs elsewhere. Like, just because you get a new job or there's a new job center closer to your house doesn't mean that you can just A, quit your job, or B, move closer to where you work. It's not. If it was that easy, everyone would have done it already. I don't understand why it's difficult to understand. Like, we have examples of this all over the US and Canada. We already have examples of it in Australia, and even in Europe that's the case. They only really suggest that the concept might not be as strong as originally proposed, or that they say it's less relevant because people don't have to physically be in a place anymore. I don't know how true that critique is. I don't think it's really that relevant, because and just as an example, if you live in Omaha and you're trying to get to London, I can almost guarantee that you've had to change planes in Chicago or New York to get there, maybe Detroit. But that is central place theory in a nutshell. In a smaller city, there are things that you just can't get because there's not enough scale to support that service. And so you have to go to a bigger hub in order to get that. And that also works on the neighborhood level. My neighborhood is not big enough to support a hospital, so there isn't one. If I need one, then I go 2 neighborhoods away. You can also look at rankings of global cities and the range of services on offer in each city, and it's quite clear that the phenomenon of central place theory still exists and it's still important. The concept works the same on a global level or on a city level or on a metropolitan level. Think about a supermarket. A lot of retail is highly dependent on household income and the number of households, because if there's 4 people in your house, you only need 1 refrigerator. But if there's 1 person in your house, you still need 1 refrigerator. So like some of the things are dependent on the number of households more so than population. But anyway, let's just say a supermarket, you might need 10 to 15,000 people for a full service supermarket. And then you probably need about 50,000 for like a Home Depot or a Bunnings, 100,000 to support a small hospital, $500,000 to support a smaller airport that still has regular flights to larger hubs. You're going to need around $1 million to support a large public university. Like I know lots of smaller cities have universities, but usually the bigger flagship universities are in cities of about 1 million or more, or they sort of support a broader geographical area of about 1 million. And then a regional trauma center, that's 1.5 million people. Airports with regular international flights to multiple destinations, that's usually about 2.5 million, give or take. It depends on what your tourist market is like. You can see this at work on multiple layers, almost everywhere. It doesn't matter how far down you shrink. The concepts, they don't change, they just get smaller. So even a super dense place like Hong Kong can still have neighborhoods that are primarily residential. People still need to take a bus or the metro to get to work, to go to the cinema, to see a dentist, to shop for clothes. All of that is just the theory before we start talking about what happened to retail and office space in this intra-Amazon post-COVID world that we live in. The decline in brick and mortar demand is intense, and it's hard to see how much farther it may fall. Regardless, what that means is a further centralization of those services. You're not going to wind up with more retail in more neighborhoods. You're going to wind up with less retail in fewer neighborhoods because we don't need as much of it anymore. I don't know if this is universal, but at least in the US, most strip malls are no longer retail. They're service-based. I mean, you walk through there and you see hair, nails, yoga, restaurants, cafes. Maybe you'll see like a consignment shop or two, and they're usually anchored by a grocery store. Like, gyms are another big one, like fitness center, like MMA or karate or whatever. Yeah, no one's selling stuff in them anymore. That's kind of the future, and something I hope to talk about later, but I really think that there's like a twofold solution there. And one is that these places need a second life as mixed use, because it's a quick way to add a bunch of new housing to a metro area on what is, you call them grayfield or whatever, but it's not a greenfield site, but it's close. You've already got the utilities there. It's already centrally located, and you're building in business for your retail. If what urbanists are saying is that we really want to like democratize retail and restaurants so that every neighborhood has them, then everybody should be a cheerleader for work from home. But then that has consequences too, because you're vibrant, bustling downtown with all the jobs. You can't maintain that. Like without people commuting to these job centers every day, you can't support that downtown restaurant and retail scene. It's just not going to work. It's not going to work how some people wish it would. It's as close as you're going to get. If you decentralize work and services, then you have new transportation problems, and you are going to have to figure out how you're going to get people around this polycentric city without cars. I mean, because all of our transit systems are still essentially hub and spoke. And it's still almost entirely the case in Europe. I mean, yeah, people are building circumferential rail lines, but that's only an acknowledgement that so much commercial activity has already moved to the suburbs. When I think about it, and just being naturally skeptical, I think, well, maybe that's it. Maybe that's all it's ever been. It's never been about what's practical and how we fix the problem. It's always been an aesthetic preference and a moral claim, because who wants to be on the wrong side of online finger wagging from the urbanist lords? What I propose, I guess, is blasphemy. The righteous urbanists with the one true belief are not going to like it. But the truth is that we've always had suburbs, and that there's nothing inherently wrong with them. Yeah, in some places we've really screwed them up over the last 60, 70 years by making them ridiculously car-centric. Not only do they not have to be, but we have examples all over the world of really amazing suburban places. And most of these places, like, when you walk around them, you don't even notice the density. Suburbs are a necessary part of every city. You can't have a vibrant downtown without having quiet and boring suburbs. The suburbs aren't the problem. It's how people get around that's the issue. It's actually really cheap and easy to fix what's broken. And I said cheap and easy, I didn't say quick, because the problem isn't that we don't know how to fix these things. The problem is the political buy-in. And to get that requires patience and fortitude and cordiality. Rome wasn't built in a day, it wasn't ruined in a week, and it wasn't rebuilt in a year. Being a dick isn't influencing anyone. If you want to make changes, you need to be out there making friends and influencing people. And like, I don't mean online. I mean like in person. I mean showing up where it matters. All of these places, from your city to your metropolitan area, to your state, you have representatives. Most of these organizations have meetings monthly, sometimes quarterly. I mean, get together with your friends and show up at your next MPO board meeting and let people know that you're coming, and tell them what you have to say. Go on the record and say it. A lot of MPOs, and I'll put mine on blast, are still captured by cars. I mean, I'm not saying it's because they want to be. It's just a treadmill that they're on, and they're not going to get off until someone pushes them. We have to be the people who push, because no one else is going to do it. My MPO is busy funding flying taxis instead of bus service, and it drives me absolutely nuts. But that's where we are. I still don't understand. I mean, I think I'm starting to understand why. Something I saw kind of recently makes me believe that it's mostly about egos and, a few narcissists who climb the ranks. It's not about what's going to work. It's about doing something that's big and flashy and getting the notoriety. Because I look at some people's track record in the Orlando area. They've been the first to do a lot of things, and I think only one of them has stuck. When I think about the amount of money that's been spent on trying to be the first instead of trying to do what works, it's hard to not be angry. And that's not just here. That sort of thinking is a problem in a lot of places. It may be a little special in the US. Not maybe. It definitely is, compared to Europe. And I don't have a good answer about why that is. Not yet. Yeah, and there are a lot of people out there who think that the future is going to be radically different from today. And it isn't. I have this conversation with my daughter quite a bit where she doesn't really have a great concept of when certain technologies existed. I think one time she was saying that she thought that phones were relatively new. Was surprised that I had a phone as a kid. And was like extra surprised to know that phones have been around for, I don't know, 140, 150 years. Right? But like the cell phone, like the smartphone didn't come out of nowhere. It was a process of making phones smaller, making computers smaller, and then putting the two of them together. There's so very rarely giant leaps in technology. Like the process is always iterative, and it's like making gradual improvements to existing technology or finding new ways to combine different existing technologies into something new. It's really difficult to point to some giant leap in new tech that didn't come from something that we already had. So I guess to wrap this up, what I'm saying is maybe, just maybe, instead of pissing off strangers online or at a local community meeting or backing them into a corner over lifestyle arguments, meet them where they are. Because when you get down to it foundationally, most people don't disagree with this stuff. You're not explaining it to them in a way that they can grasp. You're not meeting them where they are. You're not talking to them on their level. Meet them on Main Street, wherever you are, and just ask, like, hey, don't you like this place? Or don't you think this place could be better? Do you think it would be so bad if there was another one of these on the other side of town? Meet them in Mount Dora. Meet them in Red Bank or Collingswood, New Jersey. Meet them in Winter Park. Because if I'm being honest, any of those places are a shit ton more pleasant to spend a Saturday afternoon in than most of Manhattan. And not more exciting, just more pleasant. You can't just stop at meeting them on Main Street because a lot of places don't have main streets. Meet them in Ronkonkoma, in Schaumburg, in Fontana. Explain how things can be better by getting back to the way they were. I'm Jim. This is Urban Legends. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.